Meera, a young bride from a quiet Indian village, and Daniel, her foreign husband, seemed like the picture of an unlikely love story. But behind the wedding photos and promises of a new life, their marriage hid a dark secret, one that would end in betrayal, violence, and death. Tonight, we uncover how a dream union turned into a crime so shocking it left two nations in disbelief. The story begins in a quiet village in India, where life moves slowly, and traditions shape every decision. It is the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and nothing stays hidden for long. Families live side by side for generations, and reputations are guarded like treasures. In such a place, weddings are not just personal milestones, they are public spectacles. They bring together entire communities, mixing joy with judgment. People watch every detail, from the jewelry worn by the bride to the amount of money spent by her family, and stories about those details live on long after the ceremony is over. So when Meera, a 23-year-old woman from this very village, married Daniel, a foreign businessman who had been working in India, the event instantly drew attention. To some, it seemed like a fairy tale. A young woman, not wealthy, not from a powerful family, now linked to a man from a distant land. Others, however, whispered questions. Why her? What was it about Meera that caught the eye of someone like Daniel? Was it love? Was it chance? Or was there something hidden behind their union? The wedding itself was unforgettable. Bright colors filled the air, from the draped fabrics to the flowers carefully placed along the pathway. Music echoed through the village streets, and children danced with excitement. Families from all corners of the village attended, many eager not just to bless the couple but also to catch a glimpse of the foreign groom. Daniel stood out in every way. His appearance, his mannerisms, even the way he moved through the crowd, all of it fueled curiosity. Some admired him, believing Meera was lucky to have captured his attention. Others felt uneasy, as if something about him didn't belong in this setting of old traditions and long-held customs. Meera herself looked radiant, her smile wide and her eyes shining. She wore the traditional red and gold of a bride, adorned with intricate jewelry passed down from generations. To the outside world, it seemed like she had stepped into a new chapter filled with opportunity. A life abroad, away from the limitations of her small town, promised experiences most people around her could never dream of. For her family, this was a moment of pride. Their daughter had not only secured a husband, but had entered a life of stability, perhaps even prosperity. But beneath the joy, subtle cracks began to show. A few villagers recalled noticing Meera's nervousness during the ceremony. Her hands trembled slightly when she exchanged garlands with Daniel. At one point, she seemed lost in thought, almost as if her mind was far away from the celebration surrounding her. While most brushed it off as natural wedding day nerves, a few could not shake the feeling that her happiness might not be as complete as it appeared. As night fell, the celebration continued with laughter, dancing, and feasting. Yet behind the music and chatter, hushed conversations spread. Some wondered if Daniel truly understood what marrying into an Indian family meant. Others speculated about how long their marriage would last, given the cultural gap between them. No one dared to speak these thoughts openly, but in villages like this, silent doubts often travel faster than words. For Daniel, the day seemed to be a victory. He had won the admiration of some, the envy of others, and most importantly, the hand of Meera. Yet even he appeared strangely detached. He smiled, but rarely with warmth. He stood politely during rituals, but not with the eagerness of someone deeply invested in them. His presence was there, but his heart seemed elsewhere. A few sharp-eyed relatives took note of this, and though they said nothing, the impression lingered. It was only later, when the couple left for their new life abroad, that the true weight of their marriage would begin to reveal itself. But at that moment, on that day of celebration, no one could have predicted the darkness that lay ahead. And here's where I ask you, the viewer, what do you think was going through Meera's mind as she stood beside Daniel that day, Was she hopeful, afraid, or simply resigned to a choice made for her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This was a wedding that the entire village would remember, not because of its beauty, but because it would later be linked to a crime so brutal, so shocking, that even those who doubted the marriage could never have imagined what would follow. The marriage of Meera and Daniel was supposed to be a new beginning. Instead, it became the first chapter of a tragedy. When Meera left her village and moved abroad with Daniel, many imagined her life had transformed overnight. Photos she sent home painted the picture of happiness. She posed in front of modern apartments, smiled at cafes, and shared glimpses of a life that seemed far removed from the dusty lanes of her childhood. Her family, proud and reassured, told neighbors how fortunate she was to have found such a husband. But photographs can lie, and social media can conceal more than it reveals. Inside their home, the reality was far less perfect. Meera was surrounded by comfort, but comfort does not always mean peace. The silence of foreign streets felt different from the bustling chaos she grew up with. The language barrier weighed on her, the unfamiliar culture kept her isolated, and even in the presence of Daniel, she often felt like a stranger. While he carried on with his work and daily routines, Meera struggled to adjust. Caught between homesickness and the pressure to appear content, a few months into their marriage, the first cracks began to show. Meera discovered she was pregnant. For a woman raised in a culture where family and children are celebrated, this should have been joyful news. But when she told Daniel, his reaction was not what she expected. Instead of happiness, there was suspicion. He quickly began counting the weeks, matching timelines, trying to calculate whether the child could truly be his. The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. Daniel's doubts consumed him. He became withdrawn, colder, and increasingly distant from Meera. To outsiders, he appeared stressed from work, but within the walls of their apartment, the tension was thick. He scrutinized her every move, asked pointed questions, and watched for signs that might confirm his fears. Meera noticed the shift, and though she tried to reassure him, her efforts seemed to only make things worse. The suspicion eventually led Daniel to search deeper into Meera's past. Through scattered conversations and fragments of information, he uncovered a story that shook him. Before marrying him, Meera had been in a relationship. It was never publicly spoken about in her village, because such matters are often hidden. But Daniel found enough to convince himself it was true. This discovery left him spiraling, and the thought of the pregnancy being linked to another man's shadow became unbearable. Now, pause for a moment and think about this. Imagine being in Daniel's shoes. You have built a life with someone, trusted them, and suddenly you believe everything might be a lie. What would you do in his position? Would you confront your partner directly, or would you keep digging for proof? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As Daniel wrestled with his suspicions, Meera's behavior also began to change. She became quieter, more withdrawn, as if she too was guarding a secret she couldn't share. At times, she seemed distant, lost in thought, and this only fueled Daniel's paranoia. Every unexplained glance, every silence, became evidence in his mind. The walls of mistrust were closing in, and neither of them seemed able to escape. Meanwhile, Meera's pregnancy progressed. What should have been a time of care and preparation instead became a period of growing fear. Daniel watched her with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He noted her doctor visits, paid attention to every detail, and questioned inconsistencies. To him, everything seemed to confirm his darkest belief. But here's the chilling twist. No one ever knew the full truth. Was the child Daniel's, or was it from Meera's past relationship? The evidence was never conclusive. This uncertainty made the situation even more volatile. It was not facts that fueled Daniel's anger, it was the possibility. Possibility alone was enough to poison his mind, to turn love into resentment. At the same time, Meera's silence only deepened the mystery. Was she hiding the truth out of fear of losing everything? Or was she innocent, trapped in a nightmare of suspicion she could not control. The answers remain forever unclear. What is certain, though, is that this secret real or imagined was the spark that would ignite the fire of tragedy. This is where I ask you again, do you believe Meera was truly guilty of deception, or was Daniel a man too quick to believe the worst? Share your thoughts below. In the eyes of the world, the couple still looked ordinary. Their neighbors saw nothing unusual beyond the occasional arguments. Their families received updates that suggested stability, but beneath the surface, something sinister was building. Love had curdled into doubt, doubt into anger, and anger into obsession. The discovery of the pregnancy, instead of uniting them, had opened the door to destruction, and so, the hidden truth, whether real or imagined, became the weight neither of them could escape. It was the beginning of the unraveling, the calm before the storm that would end in violence. The night that would end Meera's life began quietly, like any other. Their apartment, tucked away in an ordinary building, looked no different from the outside. Neighbors returned from work, families settled into evening routines, and the world seemed calm. But inside, tension had been building for weeks, and on this particular evening, it erupted with a force no one could stop. Daniel had grown increasingly unstable in the days leading up to the incident. His suspicions about Meera's pregnancy gnawed at him, filling his thoughts until there was room for nothing else. He looked at her and no longer saw a partner, but a source of betrayal, a reminder of a life he believed was not truly his. Each glance at her growing belly deepened his rage. The secret he thought she carried became unbearable, and on that night, it broke him completely. It began with raised voices. The walls of the apartment, thin and unforgiving, carried the sounds of their argument to nearby neighbors. Some later described hearing muffled shouting, the kind of sounds that hinted at conflict but not necessarily danger. Most chose to ignore it. After all, couples fight, and no one wants to intrude. But within minutes, the shouting escalated. Furniture scraped across the floor, objects toppled, and the atmosphere shifted from argument to chaos. Meera tried to retreat, but the apartment offered no escape. Daniel's anger turned physical, and the brutality was immediate. He struck her again and again. Each blow fueled not only by rage but by the suspicion that had consumed him for months. Forensic reports would later describe the scene with chilling clarity. Broken glass littered the floor, the remains of objects thrown in anger. Bloodstains marked the walls and carpet, silent evidence of the violence unleashed. Neighbors, now alarmed, recalled hearing heavy thuds that made them pause in fear. Some considered knocking on the door, but hesitation won out. Others turned up the volume on their televisions to drown out the unsettling noises. No one imagined that inside, a young woman was fighting for her life. The assault did not stop quickly. It stretched on, a prolonged nightmare. Every attempt Meera made to shield herself only seemed to inflame Daniel further. The more she tried to resist, the more violent he became. When the attack finally ended, silence fell over the apartment, a silence more terrifying than the chaos that came before. Meera lay motionless, her body broken from the assault. She was still carrying her unborn child, and in that moment, two lives ended together. Medical examiners would later confirm that the baby could not have survived the trauma inflicted on the mother. The tragedy was doubled, and the brutality of the act left investigators shaken. What makes this part of the story even more haunting is what Daniel did immediately afterward. Instead of calling for help, instead of showing even a flicker of regret, he began pacing, trying to think of how to cover up what he had done. Panic mixed with cold calculation. He moved objects around, attempted to wipe away stains, and rehearsed what he might say if someone asked questions. But no matter how hard he tried, the evidence was everywhere. Violence leaves marks that cannot be erased so easily. Down the hall, one neighbor finally called the authorities. They reported strange noises, sounds of fighting, and then an abrupt silence that felt unnatural. When officers arrived, they found Daniel inside, his attempts at control already crumbling. The apartment told the story for him. Broken furniture, blood patterns, and injuries on his own hands revealed the truth long before words were exchanged. Meera was declared dead at the scene. Her body showed the extent of the attack, a level of violence that went far beyond a moment of anger. It was rage, sustained, deliberate, and devastating. For those who saw her that night, it was an image they would never forget. Think about this for a moment. Could anyone have stopped it? If a neighbor had knocked on the door sooner, if someone had called for help when the shouting began, would Meera and her unborn child still be alive? It is a haunting question, one that lingers over this case like a shadow. What began as suspicion had now turned into irreversible tragedy. In a matter of hours, the story of a young bride and her foreign husband shifted from a tale of cultural union to one of violence and death. The night of violence sealed Meera's fate, but it also sealed Daniel's. There was no turning back, no excuse strong enough to undo the horror of what he had done. And so, the apartment where they once lived together became a crime scene. Every object inside, from shattered glass to bloodied clothing, became evidence. Every mark on the walls was a silent witness to what had happened. Investigators carefully documented it all, piecing together the final moments of Meera's life. A story told not through words, but through the aftermath of brutality. That night, love and trust had fully dissolved into rage and violence. The fairy tale wedding that once drew whispers of envy and curiosity had now transformed into a nightmare that shocked two nations. When the police entered the apartment and uncovered the truth of what had happened, the case immediately drew attention. A young Indian bride, dead in her foreign husband's home, her life taken violently, and her unborn child gone with hurt, was the kind of tragedy that demanded answers. Within hours, the crime scene was sealed off, and Daniel was in custody. But this was only the beginning of a story that would spread far beyond the walls of that apartment. News of Meera's death reached her village within days, and disbelief quickly turned to sorrow. Families who had once celebrated her wedding now spoke of her in hushed tones. For her parents, the news was unbearable. The daughter they had proudly married off, believing she was stepping into a better life, was now gone in the most horrific way imaginable. Her mother wept openly in the streets, while her father sat in silence, unable to process the weight of what had happened. Neighbors who once envied the family now pitied them, their whispers carrying guilt for every unkind thought they had held about the marriage. Meanwhile, the investigation abroad painted a picture of overwhelming evidence. Forensic experts documented every detail of the apartment. The blood patterns, the broken objects, and the injuries on Meera's body all told the same story. This was not an accident, nor was it a single moment of uncontrolled rage. It was a sustained attack. Daniel's own attempts to clean the scene, his fingerprints on shattered glass, and his inconsistencies during questioning, sealed his fate long before the trial began. The courtroom became the stage where the tragedy was replayed in painstaking detail. Prosecutors described the brutality, emphasizing not only the loss of Meera, but also the death of her unborn child. The defense struggled to find an angle. They spoke of Daniel's stress, his cultural isolation, his growing paranoia, but none of it could erase the evidence. Photographs of the crime scene, medical reports of Meera's injuries, and the timeline of events painted him as a man who had chosen violence over truth. Media coverage intensified the case, broadcasting every development across 2 countries. In India, headlines screamed betrayal and brutality, while abroad, reporters focused on the shocking nature of the crime and the cultural backdrop of the marriage. The story of Meera's life and death became a symbol of how secrets, suspicion, and unchecked anger can destroy everything. News outlets replayed footage of her wedding day, showing her smiling face beside the man who would later take her life. The contrast was heartbreaking, and viewers everywhere struggled to reconcile the joy of her beginning with the horror of her end. When the verdict was finally delivered, it was clear and decisive. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison. For many, it felt like justice had been served, but for those closest to Meera, no sentence could fill the emptiness left by her absence. Her parents sat through the trial, listening to every painful detail, reliving their daughter's final hours over and over again. For them, the punishment did not bring peace. Instead, it confirmed that the life they had envisioned for Meera had ended in a nightmare. Back in her village, the aftermath was felt deeply. Families who once looked to her story as a tale of success and opportunity now warned their daughters of the dangers that could come with marrying outside familiar boundaries. Her home stood as a reminder of what had been lost, a place filled with memories of her laughter, her presence, and her plans for the future. Every corner carried echoes of the life she never got to live. For the broader community, Meera's story became a cautionary tale. It was about more than just betrayal and violence. It was about how fragile trust can be, how quickly love can turn dangerous, and how hidden truths, whether real or imagined, can destroy lives. The haunting part of this tragedy is that no one will ever know the full truth about the pregnancy. Was Daniel right in his suspicions, or had he destroyed his family over nothing but paranoia? That unanswered question lingers, casting a shadow over everything that followed. Even years later, the story of Meera and Daniel remains etched in memory. In court records, it is preserved as evidence of a crime. In her village, it is whispered as a tragedy too painful to forget. And for those who watched it unfold in the media, it remains a chilling reminder that behind every smiling photograph, every perfect-looking marriage, there may be secrets too dangerous to uncover. In the end, Meera's legacy is one of sorrow, but also of warning. Her life, so full of promise, was taken by the very person who vowed to protect her. The love story that began with bright colors and celebration ended in blood and silence. And though justice delivered its sentence, the truth is that no punishment could ever measure the weight of two lives lost that night. The bride and the unborn child who never had the chance to take a first breath.